Hey there. Welcome to People Count, a DiversIQ podcast where we talk about workforce diversity and human capital management from a data lens. DiversIQ is the leading provider of human capital and diversity data for the largest publicly traded companies in the world. I'm Dan Berlingeri, and today I'm joined by Olivia Luciani, the ESG analyst for Trillium. Thank you so much for being on this podcast. First of all, taking the time out of your Friday. Happy Friday, by the way.
Of course, happy Friday.
Thank you. How's your day going so far?
It's going good. It's been busy, but it's cooled off in Boston finally. So, kind of having the windows open makes work a little nicer.
Wow, nice, nice. Tell us a little bit for those who, I'm sure all of our listeners are familiar with Trillium as a company, but for our listeners who might not be familiar with your role or your focus, give us a little more context. What do you focus on day to day?
Definitely. So, for those that don't know Trillium, we're a ESG focused firm that's dated to the 80s. So, we've been in the game for a very long time. It's our sustainability is all we do. We're kind of impact focused, values focused. And what I do at Trillium is I'm an ESG research analyst, which means that I partner with our financial analyst to kind of make sure that we're achieving both financial goals and our ESG commitments.
Hmm.
So, analyzing companies' social, environmental, diversity data is something that I do in my day to day.
Fantastic. And today we're going to be focusing on materiality. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, I believe so.
Awesome. So let's take a little bit more of a focused lens this week, thinking about topics like materiality. I think, it's been on everyone's mind, especially since the pushback from the SCOTUS ruling. I think people have been wondering, how is DEI doing in this space, right? Does it still is there enough space in this industry today for that acronym DEI? How do we think about DEI? And then plenty of people going to bat around the validity and materiality around the concept of DEI. So yeah, I think I want to start out today, Olivia, if that's okay, just in helping our listeners understand from your perspective, how do you think about materiality as it pertains to maybe starting with financial?
I mean, DEI is kind of like ESG, where you can dislike the acronym, but the underlying elements are kind of always going to be there, always going to be important. So we think it's financially material for most every industry. It's something that we look at closely across industries, across companies. And kind of what it comes down to for us is that companies that are able to kind of maintain the psychological safety of their employees will have less turnover, they'll attract new employees more successfully, and they'll have a more innovative and successful workforce, which ultimately leads to financial output. I think there's a lot of concrete examples. To your comment about the Supreme Court ruling, there was a letter a couple months ago from about 12 attorneys general kind of going to bat for the materiality of diversity, making the point that companies that kind of did a great job at managing diversity at their firms financially outperformed. You can make arguments about correlation, causality, but I think there's some pretty good evidence out there. Managing your diversity well certainly does not hurt a company.
Right, right. You kind of nailed it on the head there too. Just managing your diversity well, managing all employees well takes a degree, a good management. What does that look like? And I think if I'm hearing you correctly, it also sounds like you think about DEI as a really like a proxy for understanding culture, like the strength of a culture, the strength of a workforce. Is that right?
I mean, the DEI, equity, inclusion, it's kind of a divisive workforce where people don't feel included and like they're able to work as a team to kind of do their best. So I think that's so important.
Yeah, yeah. And plenty of work and studies out there around psychological safety and how that can lead to better team dynamics, sense of belonging, innovation, just transparent communication and from individual contributor to manager, right? And like all
Absolutely.
throughout the org, truly, right? Yeah,
Yeah, and
that's
at a minimum, you avoid litigation risk.
sure.
It's kind of even if you view it as at its most basic form.
Yeah, that's interesting. Can we pull on that thread a little bit? I'm curious, if you think about or how you think about DEI from a material risk perspective. Do you examine companies in terms of like risk factors around S topics relating to corporate behavior internally? Okay.
Absolutely. As with physical health and safety, if we were evaluating a company that had way worse safety statistics in the traditional form, that would be a risk that we associate with governmental fines, with lawsuits, with loss of reputation. And the
Mm-hmm.
same goes for diversity. And with diversity,
Mm-hmm.
you also have not only that risk management piece, but the opportunities that come from having a diverse workforce. So you get both sides.
Yeah, yeah, that's super important. Just from putting on my HR hat real quick, I think we think a lot of companies think a lot about DEI as, I think a lot of HR leaders traditionally have thought about things like DEI as a kind of risk mitigating factor, right? Legally, internally protecting the company. But it's taken a real shift, right? In recent years, focusing more on a signal of outperformance, a better quality management, of less bias present in things like hiring practices, in workforce retention, employee programming. So yeah, I think that sounds like y'all are really thinking about it dynamically as Trillium as a company.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
something every company that kind of gets added to companies in our universe, our investable
Mm.
universe, we examine it pretty deeply. Our advocacy program also is constantly looking at our held companies for areas to improve.
Mm.
So it's something that we're thinking about all the time.
Nice, nice. Well, it's interesting. Seems like it requires constant vigilance because especially these days, is such a moving target, right? How would you, I mean, I guess, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're coming up against in
Mm.
today's world when I think defending some of these topic areas?
Yeah, there's, as you know, many challenges. I think recently the new one is the risk of litigation in the other way, where companies are afraid of penalization if they have certain policies around hiring or if they manage diversity in certain ways. I think the small coalition of very vocal people that's against diversity action has been sadly pretty successful in making companies afraid. And I think the other kind of more long-term challenge is just lack of data and
Mm,
lack of reporting that connects really all human capital management into the financial bottom line.
right.
So like in your 10K, there's most companies have, the qualitative section on human capital management, but there's no great accounting around companies' workforce. So
Right.
that's a major missing link.
Yeah, yeah. Huge blind spot. And also for those of us who are trying to build a stronger case for materiality, I think it's tricky. But what we do have is an understanding of how these challenges differ sector to sector. We understand that it is a dynamic conversation and that we can tie things very closely like DEI to human capital, right? Better human capital management in general. Very as a sidebar briefly, at this last conference we went to at USIF, I can't remember who had spoken about this, but someone notated that it might have been Yasu, but I don't want to quote him directly. So Yasu, if you're listening to this, I apologize. But someone had said, at a recent, I think this was a court hearing addressing DEI issues. Someone had said, or no, I think this was on the Senate floor. Somebody had said, look, we can't agree on climate change, period. This is right. I think this was a rather conservative senator said we cannot agree upon climate change, but we can agree upon human capital way more than we can get on the same page about climate change. So to me, that's something that, if we can maybe not to put the acronym aside, but to really just refocus and say, look, human capital, if we can agree upon one thing, right? If we can galvanize around the principle of materiality, right? Of just
Yes.
good management, period. Maybe we disagree on how to measure that, on the words we use to describe it. Overall, reduced bias, right? Within the workforce, upward
Absolutely.
mobility, promotions, new hiring rates, interview processes, all of that. You can't really argue with that, right? You can't really argue with that.
No, and I mean, it's most ESG issues. It's really just good, sensible governance. That's why we care about it so much. And then
Yeah.
with human capital and DEI issues, they're issues that truly affect everybody in the workforce. So, want climate action. I want companies to work on climate action. The average worker may not consciously experience the effects of climate change every day, although that's becoming increasingly more common, but your average worker experiences the effects of diversity or lack of diversity in their workplace culture every day. I'm speaking as my own experiences as like a younger woman in finance,
Yeah.
I have many friends that have left jobs due to DEI issues. And same goes
Mm.
in other industries, like my friends that are engineers. And that's talent that's walking out the door, that you're losing that capital, you're having to retrain. And it's something that's severely affected my friends. So
Yeah.
it's a deeply kind of personal issue that workers should kind of acknowledge.
Right. No one is immune to engagement, but also, I mean, I almost said no one's immune to discrimination, but that's actually false. I think that might be a false statement. But yeah, it is, unfortunately, no company is immune to cases of discrimination, right? It's very insidious. It crops up anywhere.
Yeah. And it's companies have the proper management and infrastructure to handle those cases well. It kind of really affects employee experience.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry for your experience there and for your, colleagues' experience. It's unfortunately way too common, right? It's just par for the course, but I think that's why we do the work we're doing, right? And, you started to, you were circling around this idea of like sector specific challenges. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious I want to double click on that because I think it's interesting. I think I hear from a lot of people that, or at least on the criticism side, that there is no one good rule that should rule over all industries and sectors as it comes to DEI. And, not everyone deals with the same challenges and things like that. There's a lot of criticism around that. I think, how do you think about diversity, human capital as a unique sector specific challenge?
Totally. It's, as you know, certainly not one size fits all. Different aspects of diversity and DEI are going to be more or less material for different companies. And so
Mm.
you compare a software company to a utilities company. For software, diversity really may be about peak talent, attraction, retention, innovation. For
Yeah.
a utility company, we may be really concerned with environmental justice in siting and kind of very industry specific issues. So for when I'm looking at a company, I don't just say like, I do look at their board composition. You go kind of one step beyond that and say, what are the key issues here? How are you addressing them or failing to address? And I
Mm.
think that's what kind of helps pinpoint financial materiality.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's good. I think, we have such a hard time agreeing upon the ways we measure the impact of materiality. And you're right, it has to be so custom tailored. I mean, I think we just looked at Yum brands
Mm-hmm.
recently, and they're very transparent around things like turnover. But turnover is somewhat higher than other companies, but reasonably so. It's mostly they are measuring in-house restaurant workers. And
Mm.
for some people in those sectors, it's actually an advantage to have turnover, right? I think if we compare apples to oranges, if we're looking at like Yum brands compared to, the talent wars that exist within the tech industry, people who, if you look at a senior data engineer, right, at a large tech, firm, they might have competitive compensation by leaving a company, right? And hopping company to company. A lot of that talent is hyper competitive. And some of them rotate companies once every year or 3 years, right? They'll work on a project and then move to the next one. The same, I think folks who are working within restaurants within fast food chains, they should be able to benefit from some of the same, economic opportunities. I think going company to company with more experience makes you a more valuable asset, gives you another opportunity to negotiate salary, right? To negotiate pay, every opportunity up to bat, right? In an interview process. So yeah, anyway, it's hard to, I know I compared apples to oranges, but it's hard to think about it in an overall rule because it is so specific. So, and
Yeah.
I imagine your team has a lot of work to do with that, right? You're kind of dialing in and figuring out company to company, how do we understand them on a really granular level? What are their specific challenges around materiality when it comes to talent?
What are the risks? What are the opportunities?
Yeah.
Where is that felt? I typically cover companies that have lower turnover. And I was
Mm.
working on a company kind of filling in for one of my colleagues, and the turnover was super high because it was a retail company.
Ah,
And so I was
yeah.
like, oh my gosh. And she's like, don't worry, that's just the industry. So it really, having ESG analysts specifically with industry knowledge is really beneficial.
It's awesome. Yeah, that's excellent. And those are the stories I feel like critics of this space don't get to hear often, right? They don't get to hear and see the actual data and the analysis, boots on the ground. So,
Yeah. Yeah. If you think it's all about that's really not what DEI is functionally.
Yeah,
I
not
could I
about
could
quote.
talk about critics of diversity all day long. I won't go down that road.
Right, right. No, we can focus on the things that we believe in and that we stand behind, right? And I think, yeah, I think going beyond the box checking exercise, going beyond the quota, understanding how dynamic this space is and how important and material it is yeah, it's always going to be there and it's always going to be evolving. Really quick, I know we're reaching towards the end of our time here. I had a couple other questions for you, but just curious, is there anything else you want to bring up? Any other stories around materiality or thoughts you had for our audience?
Would it be helpful on your end if I talked a little bit with how we use DiverseIQ in our investment process?
Sure. Yeah.
Definitely. Kind of to the industry specific, sector specific, we use DiverseIQ a lot to compare companies to their sector and other companies that are their direct peers. And it helps us really isolate what is exceptionally good or concerning about companies. We do this on the investment risk analysis side. We do this on our advocacy side. And it is, there's certain standards. I think it's a common standard to expect over a third women on the board. But in general, we're really using DiverseIQ to drill down on companies relative to their peers. So it's very useful.
So that's the benchmarking piece, benchmarking sector to sector. Are you drilling down into board of directors diversity specifically around? I'm just curious about this piece on self-identified demographic information. Does it ever come across your desk thinking about that from like an individual level standpoint on the board or named executive officers?
Definitely. I think looking at the proportion of the board that's from traditionally underrepresented groups is really useful kind of as a indicator of if there are greater problems, if that's diversity is something we need to look into a little bit more. I think for named executive officers, it's incredibly useful. So definitely I would say that that's the data is kind of where the research starts, kind of the benefit to the hands-on research is you can take the data, add your qualitative analysis on top and come out with some analysis that's pretty differentiated as opposed to just passively indexing based off numbers. That's that little plug for my job. I'd like to keep my job.
No, your work is so essential to, I'm sure, Trillium and what they're doing, core to your focus and your cause. And I'm flattered. Thank you for bringing us up. And I will say that Trillium has been a fantastic partner alongside us. We are, I'll say, DiverseIQ, we're not necessarily financial analysts. What we do well is research and continuity and creating a full 360 view as much as we can of this space, right? Where there are naturally gaps in diversity and human capital. But we love working with people and companies like Trillium and yourself who can help us uncover, right, the materiality, the validity of that information. And it's a joy to be able to support your work. So
you too. And it's fun seeing you at conferences.
Oh, you too. Of course. We always have a blast. Always. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And I hope you enjoy your weekend and your Friday. We do these on Fridays for a very specific reason. Everyone's at their best on a Friday. So
yeah, if it was Monday morning, I'd be really mean the whole time.
Oh yeah, grumpy. I'd be wearing PJs underneath the camera. Yeah. For the record, I am wearing pants. Full, there's a full suit happening here. Just kidding. Not really.
Well, now I feel disrespected. Where's the professionalism?
Well, thank you so much for your time, Olivia, and stay tuned. We are just a real quick plug for DiverseIQ. We hope that you enjoyed today's episode. If you liked this content, there's plenty more to check out on DiverSIQ.com. That's DiverSIQ.com. We have blogs, articles, white papers, and webinars on topics like this. And if you join our newsletter at DiverSIQ.com/newsletter, we'll send you all of those things directly to you once a week. Thank you so much, Olivia. Hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you, Dan. You too.
Thank you.